There is often a question asked, one that has existed since before time itself existed, stretching back to before the beginning. The oldest question that anyone has ever known. This question is why? And throughout all of time and space, in every conceivable universe and reality, someone has always asked the question, why? Why is there good and evil? Why is there right and wrong? Why is there light and darkness? Why is there even such a thing as pain and suffering? No matter which variant of the question you use, all of the countless questions that fill the universe all trace back to the original one, the original question of why. There are no others who can answer this question for you, and because so many have asked, I thought it only appropriate to respond. So, I will tell you the story. I will tell you the story that answers the question of why. And the story, of course, begins with myself. I am the All-Force. I have existed since before existence itself began, long before the birth of the universe, any of its multiple iterations, spanning infinitely across space and time, all realities, dimensions, long before any of it. There was simply me. To speak truthfully, I do not know how long one might determine my existence, for it was in fact before the existence of time itself. Perhaps it is a question I asked the moment that I became aware of myself, or perhaps it took eternities, the time span in which entire universes are formed, spread out, and eventually collapse in on themselves in order to repeat the process. It could have been one of these spans of a universe, or multiple. Was it in the blink of an eye, or in a length of time so long that the number of universes that exist, expanding and contracting in on themselves again and again, all of their multiple cycles stacked together, couldn't compare to it? Whichever it was, truthfully, I do not understand it myself. All that I truly know is that in all of existence, all there was me. I do not know how long I was there, how long I stood, the only thing that truly existed. It felt like forever, but truthfully, I do not know. I only know that eventually a thought came to my mind, one that had not come before. It was the very first question. The question was, why? As I stood at the center of nothing, an endless abyss of nothing, non-existent stretching as far as one could ever dream, and beyond. Why? I asked myself. Why is there nothing? Why do I do nothing? Because, truthfully, that is all I have ever done. Nothing. I simply stand here, and for the first time, I was filled with a compulsion. I wished to speak, but I was the only thing that existed, and so I elected to speak to myself for the first time, giving myself form and stance as I opened my eyes, looking before me to see my own reflection. Myself. Why? Why is it that you wish to speak? I asked myself. Or perhaps the wiser question is, why is it that you created the concept of speaking to begin with? It is not necessary. Yes, I replied. But why is it not necessary? It is not necessary because it is not, I replied to myself. Nothing is necessary. Our existence will continue regardless. There is no purpose in taking action because there is nothing, no one. We simply exist. So, nothing is required to sustain this. We needn't act in order to ensure our existence, and thus inaction is the only reasonable one. Yes, but if that is true, I ask myself, then why do I feel this compulsion? This compulsion to speak, to think? Why do I find myself imagining anything beyond my own existence? Truly you are correct. It is unnecessary. And yet, I experience it all the same. This desire for there to be something else. And so too you have created another thing. This concept of desire that compels you to act when acting is unnecessary. I said to myself, what do you believe will change if you decide to act? Truthfully, I do not know, I replied, but all the same, I am compelled to do so. Well then, if acting is the only thing that will end this compulsion, then, regardless of whether it is necessary or not, the only way to end the compulsion is to act. Therefore, action is the only correct answer, I said to myself as I faded away before my eyes. And in that moment, it was decided. I wished for there to be something other than me, as I am the only thing that exists. The only method is to create something other than me. And so, from my being, I derived the seven purest energies that fabricated my existence, and began to focus them, filling them, creating each of them, separate from me. Though they are made of my being, I gave them consciousness, all their own, forging them from these seven energies, so that I might bring an end to this compulsion. As I did, the swirls of energy began to coalesce, creating forms that now stood before me. I do not know how long it took to create them. Once again, time did not yet exist. But eventually, they all stood before me. My seven creations. I decided to call them my children. And so the concept of children was created, as was the concept of a parent. And for some time, this alleviated the compulsion to act. I simply stood by and observed their behavior and actions, finding each one of them drastically different from the next. They all had personalities, individual characteristics that seemed to define their existence. They even began to speak to me. At first, I did not respond. I was uncertain about how to do so, or why I would. But in time, I began to reply to them as they asked me questions. One of the very first being, why? Why am I here? Who am I? And so I told them of myself and their creation. And in time, our relationship blossomed as I interacted with all of them. For some reason, this felt fulfilling. And as they continued to exist, so too did their interactions continue to exist and develop. Unique relationships began to form between them. Some seemed antagonistic, others very nurturing and supportive. They created new forms of interaction that seemed somewhat strange to me, but were captivating to see and even participate in myself. They created games that they would play amongst each other. It was while that they played one of these games that the next step truly began.
So, what do you guys want to play now?
Yellow said, as she spoke to Blue. I don't know, Yellow. Frankly, I'm not sure if I want to play anything. It's all seeming to get boring.
Oh, come on. We could play for a little while longer. Why don't we play Past the Energy? Do you want to play Big Sis?
Yellow said, as she looked over to see a swirl of black energy with wisps of all of the different colors ebbing from within the shadow. I don't want to play. I never win.
Well, of course you don't win, silly. You have to play in order to win. You always just sit there.
I don't want to play if I can't win. Winning requires movement. Why would I move? It's not as if anything will get better if I do. So, leave me alone, the whirl of shadow said, as it began to face Yellow, and a large ripple of red poured through it, bright gleaming eyes of red glaring out, that quickly subsided away as she went back to cradling herself, curled up into the fetal position, simply doing nothing. How long must we play these asinine games? These games that have no purpose or meaning, Red exclaimed. What is to be gained from it? No matter how many times we pass the energy from one to another, it amounts to nothing. Well, that's not true, Red. A golden swirl of vibrant orange light exclaimed. When we pass the energy amongst each other, we have feelings. The interaction creates those feelings, and so you cannot say it is without purpose. Yellow always feels joyful when she passes the ball of energy from place to place. Ugh, Yellow is a fool. None of this has any meaning. If we are to play a game, might it not be one with purpose? Well, what purpose is there, brother? I believe that Red has a point, a whirl of purple energy exclaimed, as she walked forward. Truly, we are all that exists, us and our Father. The only true purpose is in how we affect one another. This is, in reality, purpose in and of itself. But I have found that affecting things that are not you seems to have a profound influence upon us. Yet, we ourselves may be temporarily affected by the playing of this game. None of those changes are permanent. They are temporary and drift away. Perhaps, if we create a game where we affect something aside from ourselves.
Now you're talking,
a whirl of green energy said, as it cartwheeled around, moving from place to place, never really ceasing its motion.
I mean, I don't know how half of you stand to just sit around all the time. You never move. Honestly, Yellow's the only one who wants to play,
the swirl of green energy said as it bounced about.
And I agree with Purple. If we're gonna play a game, why don't we play some that has some sort of purpose, that affects something besides us?
You forget, Green. We are all that exists. Us and our Father, Blue replied. There is nothing else to affect. Well, then why don't we make something? Well, we do make stuff, all the time, Blue replied. No, something more complicated than simply a ball of energy. Why don't we truly make something, like our Father before us? commit to a purpose, an agenda of creation. Our Father created us by dividing his energies. Perhaps we could create something else. Currently, all we've been doing is creating balls of energy. These balls of energy exist only as a segment of us and act differently depending on who creates it. But why don't we try shifting things around a bit, creating mixtures of energy, and see what comes from it? And so, the group began to try to create a new game, the game of creation. And so, in time, they learned to create many different things by combining their colors in different amounts, finding that different things would form in the flow of these energies. They defined what all of these different things were. Some they called earth, others air or electricity, light and shadow. They created forces such as gravity and a countless array of other things until they had created every single amalgamation that was possible to create with their 7 colors. And for a time, this was fulfilling. But eventually, they grew bored of these inanimate things, these whirls of matter and energy that did nothing but exist until they decided not to let them anymore. They played countless games with these materials, figuring out different ways to use them, and for some time it was entertaining. But eventually, all the games had been played so many times that none were interested in them, excluding Yellow, who never seemed to grow bored of any game. That was until amongst them an idea emerged. They had been created from my energies, and they were conscious and aware. They could think and act of their own accord. So why was it that they had never thought to do the same? Why could they not create living things with consciousness just as them? Their first attempts to create these things, what they referred to as life, did not fare well. They found that these forms of life could not sustain themselves within the void of existence in which they lived. It was necessary to create a space that was habitable for them, as they could not exist in non-existence, as they did. And so after much discussion and immense planning, deciding how everything would work, how to create a space for these living beings that they wished to create, all of them combined their energy and focus into a single, combined act of will. I watched in astonishment, impressed with the creativity, motivation, and designs of my children as they created the universe, the very first iteration. And this is where everything truly begins.